In the shadowed cradle of eternal twilight, where the moon weeps silver tears upon forgotten graves, a king's remorse awakens what the heart had long entombed. The wind howled through the ancient cemetery like a lament from the earth's own throat, carrying the scent of damp soil and wilting roses. Ilara Voss knelt before the small, weathered stone, her fingers tracing the etched name, Elias. Her son, gone these 3 years, taken by a fever that no healer could conquer. At 32, Ilara was a ghost in her own life, a maid in the sprawling estate of the Alpha King, her days blurred into nights of silent service. Born in the misty highlands of Eldridge, orphaned young by a raid that left her family in ashes, she had fled to the city seeking solace, only to find chains in the form of duty. Her trauma lingered like a scar across her soul. The fire's roar, her mother's final scream, the emptiness that followed. She desired nothing now but quiet oblivion, a life without the ache of memory. Yet here, under the canopy of yew trees, she wept, her tears soaking the earth as if they could summon him back. The estate loomed in the distance, its turrets piercing the fog like accusatory fingers. Thorn Blackwood, the Alpha King, ruled from its heart, a werewolf lord of unmatched power, his lineage tracing back to the primordial packs of the wilds. At 4 centuries old, he appeared as a man in his prime, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with eyes like storm clouds heavy with rain. But immortality had carved deep lines of solitude into him. Once a warrior who led his kin through bloody wars, he had lost his mate to a rival clan's betrayal, watching her bleed out under a harvest moon. The guilt gnawed at him. He had chosen power over protection, ambition over love. Now, he wandered his halls alone, ethical in his rule, yet haunted by the shadows of those he had failed. He sought redemption, though he dared not name it, yearning for a connection that could thaw the ice around his heart. Thorn had not meant to intrude on the graveyard that night. Drawn by the pull of the full moon, his wolf senses sharpened. He prowled the grounds to quell the restless beast within. The air thickened with salt, tears, not sea. He paused at the iron gate, his heightened hearing catching the broken sobs. Curiosity, laced with an unfamiliar tenderness, propelled him forward. There she was, Ilara, the quiet maid who dusted his chambers with mechanical precision, her face buried in her hands. He had noticed her before, pale skin like porcelain cracked by sorrow, auburn hair falling in untamed waves, but never like this, raw and unraveling. He stepped closer, his boots silent on the mossy path. The wind carried her scent, wild heather and fresh grief. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that startled her. She jerked upright, eyes wide with fear, wiping her face with trembling hands. Moonlight caught the silver locket at her throat, a relic from Elias, its surface etched with a tiny wolf's paw, a symbol she wore without knowing its deeper meaning. "My lord," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. Dust clung to her simple black dress, the fabric worn thin from endless labor. I did not mean to disturb the night." Thorn's gaze fell to the grave. Elias Voss, aged 5. A child's name, innocent and cruelly brief. Something stirred in him, an echo of his own losses. "This place is for the lost," he said softly, kneeling beside her. The stone was cold under his palm, textured like the rough bark of ancient oaks. "Who was he to you?" Her breath hitched, the sound sharp in the stillness. Rain began to patter against the leaves, a rhythmic whisper. She hesitated, rationalizing the danger of vulnerability before a king whose temper was legend. But the words spilled out, inevitable as the downpour. "My son, taken by illness. I bury my screams here, every night." Thorn's chest tightened. He had sired no heirs since his mate's death, his bloodline a solitary thread. Yet this woman's pain mirrored his own isolation. "Grief is a shadow that follows without mercy," he replied, his ethical core urging him to offer solace, not command. He removed his cloak, heavy with the scent of pine and leather, and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was resisted in her mind. He was her master, untouchable. But her body leaned into the warmth. As thunder rolled distant, like the growl of awakening beasts, Ilara glanced at him. His eyes held no pity, only a shadowed understanding. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a servant, but as a soul adrift. Thorn, too, felt the pull, an inexplicable thread binding mortal fragility to immortal endurance. The death that haunted her grave seemed to watch them, invisible yet palpable, whispering of choices yet to come. They sat in silence as the rain intensified, drumming on the earth like impatient fingers. Ilara's hand brushed his accidentally, sending a spark through the damp air. She pulled away, heart pounding, rationalizing it as folly. But Thorn lingered, the texture of her sorrow weaving into his guilt, hinting at a transformation neither could foresee. When she finally rose, murmuring thanks, he watched her retreat toward the estate, her figure swallowed by mist. Alone with the grave, Thorn touched the stone again. What secrets did this child hold? And why did the maid's tears stir the beast within him to protect, to claim? The moon climbed higher, casting long shadows that danced like unspoken promises. In that moment, he wondered if redemption could bloom from such fertile ground, or if it would only deepen the curse of eternity. Dawn crept over the estate like a reluctant thief, painting the stone walls in hues of bruised purple and fading gold. Ilara moved through the kitchens with the precision of habit, her hands raw from scrubbing pots that gleamed like false promises. The encounter at the grave lingered in her mind, a forbidden warmth amid the chill of routine. She had dreamed of Thorn's eyes, stormy and searching, but dismissed it as delirium born of exhaustion. At her core, she was broken, abandoned by fate, her body still weakened from the illness that had claimed Elias, leaving her frail and disillusioned with any notion of hope. Thorn, meanwhile, paced his study, the room heavy with the scent of aged leather and flickering candlelight. Tall windows framed the misty gardens, where dew clung to rose thorns like blood droplets. He had ruled his pack with iron ethics, mediating disputes among the werewolves who served him, but personal solace eluded him. His trauma replayed in flashes, his mate's final breath, her blood staining the forest floor, his howl echoing unanswered. He desired a bond that transcended power, yet immortality had taught him isolation's bite. Last night's intrusion haunted him. Ilara's grief had cracked his armored solitude, making him question the walls he had built. As midday sun pierced the clouds, casting golden shafts through the halls, Thorn sought her out. He found her in the library, dusting shelves lined with tomes on ancient lore, forgotten rituals of pack bonds and lunar rites. The air smelled of parchment and wax, the floorboards creaking under his weight like old bones protesting movement. "Ilara," he called, his voice echoing softly. She turned, locket glinting at her throat, surprise flickering across her features. Up close, her eyes were the color of storm-tossed seas, holding depths he longed to plumb. "My lord," she replied, curtsying, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She rationalized his presence as oversight, nothing more. He approached, the space between them charged like the air before a lightning strike. "The grave, Elias, tell me of him." It was not a command, but an invitation, his ethical nature demanding truth over coercion. She hesitated, fingers tightening on the feather duster. The room's silence amplified her heartbeat, distant thunder in her ears. Slowly, words emerged. Elias's laughter like wind chimes, his tiny hands clutching wildflowers, the fever's merciless grip. "He was my light," she whispered, "extinguished too soon. I failed him." Thorn's hand hovered near hers, the heat of his skin a contrast to the cool air. "Failure is the shadow of love," he said, his tone introspective, philosophical. "I know its weight." He spoke then of his mate, the words halting, a revelation pulled from shadowed corners. The intimacy built slowly, resisted by her fear of attachment, inevitable as the turning of seasons. Outside, wind rustled the leaves, carrying the faint howl of distant wolves. Alara glanced at the window, where rain began to speckle the glass again. Thorn noticed the locket, its paw symbol catching the light. "A token?" he asked. "From his father," she lied softly, the truth buried deep, Elias's sire unknown, a fleeting encounter in her youth. But the lie hung between them, textured with unspoken pain. As they spoke, a servant interrupted, bearing news of pack unrest, whispers of a rival alpha encroaching on their lands. Thorn's jaw tightened, the king awakening. "Stay within these walls," he urged Alara, his protectiveness surging unbidden. She nodded, but as he left, doubt gnawed at her. Could she trust the pull toward this immortal stranger? That evening, alone in her sparse quarters, Alara touched the locket, feeling its cool metal against her skin. The estate's candles burned low, shadows playing across the walls like specters. Thorn, in his chambers, stared at the moon rising, its light filtering through velvet curtains. The Dhampir lore of old whispered in his mind, hybrids born of mortal and immortal unions, fierce and fated. But Alara was no such creature. She was human, fragile, yet something in her scent, her sorrow, stirred ancient instincts. The night deepened, and with it, the first threads of transformation. Alara dreamed of wolves circling a grave, Thorn's voice calling her name. Awakening with a start, she felt the estate's pulse quicken, as if the walls themselves anticipated a choice between life's fleeting warmth and eternity's cold embrace. Candle flames danced in the grand hall like captive stars, their golden flicker illuminating tapestries woven with scenes of ancient hunts, wolves tearing through moonlit forests, blood staining the snow. Alara stood at the periphery, serving wine to the gathered pack members, her movements graceful yet distant. The air was thick with the aroma of spiced meats and aged oak, but beneath it lurked the metallic tang of tension. Whispers of the rival alpha's approach had summoned this council, and Thorn presided at the head, his presence commanding, eyes scanning the room until they settled on her. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, warm against the chill seeping from the stone floors. Since their talk in the library, avoidance had become her shield. The attraction was resisted, rationalized as gratitude misplaced. Her body ached from lingering illness, a reminder of her mortality, while her mind wrestled with desolation, Elias's absence a void that no duty could fill. Thorn, ever the ethical ruler, mediated the debates with measured words, his solitude evident in the way he isolated himself even among kin. His guilt over his mate fueled a desire for genuine connection, one untainted by power. As the meeting dragged into the velvet hours, a sudden commotion erupted. A scout burst through the doors, rain-slicked and breathless, his report shattering the calm. The rivals had desecrated a border shrine, leaving a warning in claw marks. Chaos rippled, growls, accusations. Thorn rose, his voice cutting through like thunder. "We stand united, or we fall divided." In the fray, Alara was jostled, a glass slipping from her hand to shatter on the floor, shards glinting like broken promises. She knelt to gather them, cuts blooming on her palms, blood welling in crimson beads. Thorn was at her side in an instant, his hand enveloping hers, the contact electric. The room hushed, eyes widening at the king's tenderness toward a mere maid. "Leave us," he commanded, leading her to an adjoining chamber. The door closed with a resonant thud, sealing them in intimacy. Velvet drapes muffled the outer storm, candles casting their faces in soft, wavering light. He bound her wounds with a strip from his own shirt, the fabric rough against her skin, scented with his essence, earth and wild musk. "Why do you care?" she whispered, pain sharpening her words. Her heart raced, the death that shadowed her life, feeling closer in his immortal proximity. "Because your pain mirrors mine," he confessed, his voice low, introspective. He revealed more then, a ritual from his past, a lunar ceremony where he had chosen eternity over death for his pack, dooming himself to endless remorse. Love is both salvation and chain. Ilara pulled back, rationalizing the spark between them as illusion. Yet, as he traced the locket's edge, a memory surfaced. Elias's birth under a full moon, his cries echoing with an otherworldly howl. Doubt flickered. Could her son have carried wolf blood? The thought was a revelation, shaking her world. Outside, lightning cracked, illuminating the window like a fractured mirror. Thorn's eyes darkened with hunger, not for blood, but for truth. "You are more than you know," he murmured, the words a bridge to forbidden depths. She fled the chamber as the council reconvened, her bandaged hands throbbing, mind reeling. In her room, staring at the locket, Ilara wept anew, not for Elias alone, but for the choice looming. Embrace the shadows with him, or cling to a mortal life unraveling at the seams. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Fog clung to the estate's battlements like a shroud, muting the world to whispers and half-shadows. Ilara wandered the upper corridors at twilight, the locket heavy against her chest, its paw symbol now a taunt. Sleep had evaded her since the hall's revelation. Dreams blended Elias's face with thorns, wolves howling in harmony. Her disillusionment deepened, abandoned by health, by hope. She rationalized the growing pull toward the king as desperation, yet it persisted, inevitable as the tide. Thorn brooded in the armory, sharpening blades under the glow of a single candelabro, its flames reflecting off polished steel like captured stars. The rival threat loomed, but his thoughts fixated on Ilara. His ethical code demanded he protect his people, yet guilt over past choices, sparing a traitorous beta only for it to cost lives, isolated him further. He desired her not as conquest, but as the key to unlocking his frozen heart, a redemption through shared vulnerability. A knock echoed, soft, hesitant. Ilara entered, carrying a tray of mulled wine, her excuse thin. The room smelled of oil and iron, the air cool against her skin. "For your strength, my lord," she said, avoiding his eyes. He set the blade aside, rising to meet her. Close now, the space between them hummed with unspoken tension. "You seek more than respite," he observed, his voice a caress. She met his gaze, the resistance crumbling. The locket. Elias. He was born during a lunar rite in the highlands. His father, a traveler I thought human. But the howls. Her words trailed, a confession laced with fear. Thorn's eyes widened. The paw symbol was no coincidence. A Dhampir bond, half mortal, half wolf. Elias had been marked. His death perhaps no accident, but a targeted strike. The revelation hit like a ritual's climax. Thorn revealed his own hybrid lineage. The Alpha King's blood mingled with ancient vampire strains from a forgotten alliance, granting him not just wolf strength, but glimpses of eternity's curse. "Your son was kin to this world," he said, touching her arm. The contact ignited something primal, her skin tingling with newfound awareness. Wind howled outside, rattling the windows like impatient ghosts. Ilara stepped back, heart pounding. "This changes nothing. I am broken, mortal." But the lie tasted bitter. The texture of his touch lingered, promising transformation. As night fell, Thorn trained alone in the courtyard, snow beginning to dust the ground like powdered bone. Ilara watched from a turret, the cold seeping into her bones. Death hovered, invisible in the rival's encroaching shadows. Would she choose to uncover the truth, risking her fragile life for a love that could redeem them both, or shatter what remained? Snow fell in relentless veils, blanketing the estate in a hush broken only by the crackle of hearth fires. Ilara huddled in the greenhouse, surrounded by wilted blooms that mirrored her inner decay, roses with petals curled like clenched fists. The locket burned against her skin, Elias's secret unraveling her resolve. Doenza lingered in her veins, a slow poison, leaving her weak and desolutida. Yet the memory of Thorn's touch fueled a forbidden yearning. She resisted, rationalizing it as survival's illusion. But the inevitability grew. Thorn convened his inner circle in the war room, maps spread under the light of iron lanterns, their glow casting elongated shadows like accusing fingers. The rival Alpha's forces gathered at the borders, their intent clear: challenge his rule. His solitude weighed heavier now, guilt from his mate's death intertwining with fear for Ilara. Ethical to his core, he planned defenses not for glory, but preservation. His pack, and now her. A messenger arrived at midnight, bearing a truce offer laced with deceit. Meet at the old ruins under truce flag. Thorn sensed the trap, but accepted, his wolf instincts sharpening. Before departing, he sought Ilara in the greenhouse, the glass panes fogged with breath and frost. "You must stay hidden," he urged, his hand cupping her face, thumb tracing her cheek's soft texture. The air smelled of earth and decay, candles guttering in the draft. She pulled away slightly, eyes stormy. "And watch from shadows? Elias died because I hid truths. No more." Her confession deepened. The traveler father had been a rogue wolf, bitten her in passion, marking Elias, and perhaps her, as Dhampir kin, carriers of immortal potential. Thorn's breath caught, the revelation a thunderclap. "Then you are no fragile mortal. The bond calls to you." He spoke of his own choice centuries ago. Facing death in battle, he had embraced the hybrid rite, gaining eternity but losing humanity's warmth. Love, he admitted, was the curse he now craved to break. Their lips met then, slow and searing, the kiss a ritual of awakening. Snow tapped the glass like distant applause, her hands fisting in his shirt, the fabric rough and real. But she broke away, rationalizing the fire as danger. This path leads to loss. He left for the ruins, the night alive with howls. Ilara paced, the greenhouse's humidity clinging like sweat. As dawn neared, a scout returned, wounded. Ambush. Thorn lived, but captured. The choice crystallized: flee into mortal obscurity or embrace the shadows to save him, transforming grief into power. Moonlight filtered through the ruins' crumbling arches, turning snow to shimmering veils that muffled the clash of steel and snarls. Thorn fought bound in chains, forged with silver runes, his hybrid strength tested against the rival Alpha's horde. The air reeked of blood and pine, the ground slick with crimson that steamed in the cold. His thoughts anchored to Ilara, her touch a beacon amid the fury. Guilt fueled his resolve. He would not fail another. Ilara, defying caution, slipped from the estate under cover of darkness, her Dhampir blood stirring with latent power. Weakness plagued her steps, the illness a chain, but desperation sharpened her senses. Abandoned no more, she navigated the forest paths, wind whipping her hair like vengeful spirits. The locket pulsed, guiding her as if Elias whispered directions. Arriving at the ruins, she hid in the shadows, witnessing Thorn's defiance. The rival, a scarred brute named Draven, taunted him. "Your eternity ends tonight, pretender." But Ilara's presence rippled through the air, her scent reaching Thorn. Their eyes met across the fray, a silent vow. In a moment of chaos, she emerged, voice steady. "Release him." Draven laughed, but her eyes glowed faintly, the Dhampir awakening. A ritual ignited within her. Channeling the bond, she shattered Thorn's chains with a surge of inherited strength, the metal fracturing like brittle bone. They fought back to back, her movements fluid, his protective. Blood sprayed, warm and sticky, the snow absorbing it in dark blooms. Intimacy bloomed in the violence, their hands brushing, breaths sinking. "You chose this," Thorn growled, admiration in his tone. As Draven fell, the horde retreated, the night echoing with their howls. Bruised and alive, Thorn pulled Ilara close, the ruined stones cool against their heat. "Redemption is ours," he whispered, but she felt the curse's weight, immortality's call tempting her fragile form. Back at the estate, as fires roared in celebration, Ilara confronted the mirror in her chamber, seeing not weakness, but potential. The transformation beckoned, accept the right to bind with him eternally, or cling to humanity's fleeting light. Death watched from the edges, patient. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. The first light of dawn filtered through the estate's arched windows like hesitant fingers, brushing aside the remnants of night with strokes of fragile gold that melted the snow into slender rivulets tracing the cobblestone paths. Each droplet caught the emerging sun, shimmering briefly before vanishing into the earth, a fleeting reminder of life's impermanence amid the enduring stone. Ilara stood on the balcony overlooking the scarred gardens, where thorns from the wild rose bushes snagged the hem of her gown like insistent whispers from the shadows. The wind, cool and laced with the crisp bite of pine and distant smoke from the previous night's fires, tugged at her auburn hair, carrying faint echoes of the battle's aftermath. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the scorched earth where flames had licked the underbrush. Her body still thrummed with the nascent vigor of her Dhampir awakening, old wounds from illness and grief knitting together beneath her skin like threads pulled taut in a loom. Yet her mind, a tempest of swirling doubts, reeled from the precipice of choice. No longer shackled solely by disillusionment and isolation, she resisted the full embrace of eternity, rationalizing it as a profound loss of self, a surrender to the immortal's endless vigil over fleeting joys. Thorn's presence, however, pulled at her like the inexorable gravity of the moon upon the tides, inevitable and unyielding. He found her there, his footsteps soft on the worn oak planks that creaked like the settling bones of the ancient estate. Thorn Blackwood moved with the quiet authority of one who had outlived centuries, his broad frame bandaged from the ruin's fray, dark hair tousled by the wind, eyes reflecting the rising sun's amber glow with a depth that spoke of storms weathered and scars hidden. The pack below hailed him as victor in scattered howls that rose like a chorus of gratitude. But to him, such triumphs tasted hollow, mere echoes in the vast chamber of his solitude. His ethical reign, forged in the fires of mediation and mercy, had strengthened through the night's trial, binding his werewolves closer in loyalty. Yet guilt, that relentless companion, gnawed deeper now, compounded by the peril he had unwittingly drawn upon Ilara. He desired her not as a trophy of power, but as the fragile key to unlocking the frozen vault of his heart, a redemption woven from shared vulnerability, where love could transmute curse into communion. "The right awaits us," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble that cut through the wind's murmur, carrying the subtle texture of gravel and warmth, like aged whiskey poured over embers. He stepped closer, the space between them charged with the faint scent of leather from his cloak and the earthy musk of his skin, still marked by the night's exertion. Ilara turned, her storm-tossed eyes meeting his, the locket at her throat catching the light in a silver glint that evoked Elias's lost laughter. "A right that binds me to shadows I may not survive," she replied, her tone laced with the philosophical weight of her mortal fears. They descended the spiral staircase together, the air growing thicker with the aroma of dew-kissed earth and blooming nightshade, its purple petals unfurling defiantly amid the decay of fallen leaves. In the gardens they walked side by side, the gravel crunching underfoot like brittle secrets yielding to pressure. Thorns snagged at their clothes, her simple woolen dress, his linen shirt, drawing tiny beads of blood that welled like rubies against pale skin, a sensory reminder of the thin veil between pain and passion. As they paused by a weathered fountain, its basin cracked and overgrown with ivy that whispered against the stone in the breeze, Ilara confessed the deeper strata of her traumas. The raid that had orphaned her in the misty highlands replayed in vivid fragments, the acrid smoke choking her lungs, her mother's final scream swallowed by flames, the cold abandonment by Elias's father, a rogue wolf whose fleeting passion had marked her unknowingly with Dhampir potential. "I have lived half a life," she murmured, her voice trembling like the water's surface disturbed by a falling petal. "Punished by illness for dreams I dared not chase. Eternity feels like exile from the very humanity that broke me." Thorn knelt then, gathering a handful of damp soil, letting it sift through his fingers in dark rivulets that stained his skin. His own solitude unfolded in response, a philosophical tapestry woven from centuries of isolation. "Immortality is memory's unyielding prison," he confessed, his eyes distant as if gazing into the abyss of lost moons. "I chose it in the heat of battle, embracing the hybrid right to shield my pack from death's scythe, only to watch love's wither while I endure. Love alone is the key that turns the lock, redemptive, yet chaining us to witness endless farewells." Their conversation wove onward, the sun climbing higher to cast dappled shadows through the canopy of yew trees, their branches heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. Suddenly, a shadow stirred in the undergrowth, a messenger from the rival remnants, cloaked in ragged furs that reeked of wet dog and desperation. He bore a chalice as a peace offering, its surface etched with runes that gleamed ominously in the light. Thorn reached for it, but Ilara's heightened senses, now attuned like a wolf's to the subtlest discord, flared. The air around the vessel hummed with malice, a faint, acrid undercurrent of nightshade poison threading through the mulled wine's spiced aroma. With a swift motion, she shattered it against the fountain's edge, the liquid spilling in dark rivulets that hissed upon the stone, releasing a vapor that curled like spectral fingers. The act was a revelation, a pivotal choice to protect rather than cower, mirroring Thorn's own ethical compass. The messenger fled into the thicket, but the incident ignited a spark between them, Ilara's hand lingering on his arm, the warmth of her touch seeping through fabric like sunlight piercing fog. As evening descended, the sky bruising into purples and indigos, they made their way to the chapel ruins on the estate's far grounds. Candles had been lit within the crumbling arches, their flames dancing like hopeful spirits trapped in amber glass, casting elongated shadows that played across moss-covered walls textured with the patina of ages. The air inside was thick with incense, myrrh and sandalwood, mingling with the damp earthiness of stone, while distant thunder rumbled like the growl of awakening beasts. Thorn knelt before the makeshift altar, a slab of weathered marble veined with quartz that caught the candlelight in prismatic flashes. From a hidden pouch at his belt, he drew an ancient ring, its band forged of silver and gold intertwined, etched with the entwined symbols of a wolf's silhouette and a thorned rose, emblems of their burgeoning bond, fierce protection laced with inevitable pain. "Choose life with me, eternal," he urged, holding it forth, the metal cool and heavy in his palm, promising both sanctuary and sorrow. Ilara's hand trembled as she extended it, the ring slipping onto her finger with a soft click that resonated in the hushed space. The ritual energy hummed to life, an invisible current that raised the hairs on her arms and quickened her pulse to match the distant patter of rain beginning to fall outside. Wind sighed through the chapel's cracks like ancestral breaths approving the union, sealing her partial transformation, infusing her with Dampir's strength and longevity without the full severing of mortality's thread, a delicate bridge between worlds fragile as spun glass. But as they rose, locked in an embrace where his arms encircled her like ancient oaks guarding a sapling, a scout's urgent cry pierced the night from beyond the ruins. Reinforcements for the rival horde marching under cover of storm with banners soaked in blood oaths. The dilemma crystallized, ethical and raw in its immediacy. Unite the fractured packs through an act of mercy, offering integration and forgiveness to the survivors, or unleash the full fury of war's shadow upon them, dooming cycles of vengeance to repeat? Ilara's heart raced beneath the ring's newfound weight, a tactile anchor reminding her that love could redeem even the most shadowed paths. But eternity cursed them with choices as endless and unforgiving as the stars wheeling overhead. Storm clouds amassed over the estate like brooding sentinels, their underbellies swollen and dark, unleashing thunder that rolled across the valleys in waves of guttural warning, as if the heavens themselves mourned the fragile peace. Lightning forked through the gloom at irregular intervals, illuminating the battlements in stark white flashes that etched the stone gargoyles' grimaces into momentary relief, their mouths frozen in eternal snarls. Ilara trained in the hidden glade deep within the estate's forested heart, a secluded hollow ringed by ancient oaks whose gnarled branches intertwined overhead like the fingers of lovers long parted. The ground was carpeted in a thick layer of fallen leaves, damp and yielding underfoot, releasing an earthy perfume with each step, moss and decay intertwined with the sharper tang of pine sap. Snowflakes, harbingers of winter's advance, drifted lazily through the canopy, melting upon her skin in cool kisses that contrasted the heat building within her from exertion. Her Dampir abilities unfolded with each fluid motion, agility as swift and unpredictable as the wind rustling the leaves, senses piercing the gathering fog like arrows loosed from a drawn bow. She darted between the trees, her breaths coming in measured rhythms that synced with the distant drum of thunder, parrying imagined strikes with a staff carved from yew, its wood smooth and cool, textured with the subtle grain of centuries. The ring on her finger caught the lightning's erratic flashes, its rose engraving seeming to pulse with inner light, a tactile promise of the bond that now coursed through her veins. No longer the broken vessel of old, she wrestled with the transformation's profound cost, glimpses of eternity sharpening her pains to exquisite edges, making Elias's loss not a dull ache, but an eternal wound that throbbed with crystalline clarity. She rationalized the urge to pull away, to retreat into the comforting veil of mortality's brevity. But the love blooming between her and Thorn was inevitable, weaving through her essence like roots delving deep into fertile soil, unyielding and nourishing. Thorn observed from the glade's edge, partially concealed by a curtain of ivy that draped a fallen log like a velvet shroud, his pride in her burgeoning power mingling with a visceral fear that clawed at his chest. The pack's loyalty had solidified in the wake of their victory at the ruins, werewolves gathering in the great hall to share tales by roaring hearths, the air thick with the savory scents of roasted venison and mulled cider. Yet his solitude persisted, a shadow that no communal fire could fully dispel. His guilt over his mate's long-ago death now compounded by the fresh peril he had drawn upon Ilara's fragile form. Ethical dilemmas had always defined his rule, sparing the traitorous Beta in his youth only to witness the ensuing bloodshed, choosing mercy over vengeance time and again, yet now they intertwined with personal desire. He yearned for her fully, body and soul, in a union that could alchemize their shared scars into something transcendent, a love that bridged the chasm between mortal warmth and immortal depth. As dusk deepened into an inky pall, the rivals struck with calculated ferocity, infiltrating the estate under the deceitful guise of truce envoys, their cloaks bearing false sigils that fluttered like tattered ghosts in the gale. Chaos erupted in the vaulted halls, the clash of fangs against flesh, the guttural snarls of wolves shifting mid-stride, the wet, ripping sounds of claws tearing through fur and sinew. The air grew thick with the coppery reek of blood and the acrid bite of fear sweat. Candles toppling from sconces to gutter on the flagstone floors in pools of molten wax that hissed and spat. Ilara moved through the melee like a specter of vengeance, her heightened senses guiding her to protect a wounded pup. A young werewolf with fur matted in crimson, whimpering in an alcove shadowed by tapestries depicting ancient lunar rites. She dispatched 2 assailants with precise strikes, her staff whistling through the air, the impact reverberating up her arms like thunder's echo, her blood singing with the raw power of her Dhampir heritage. Thorn battled deeper in the corridors, facing Draven's lieutenant, a massive beta whose body was a map of scars from old grudges, his eyes burning with fanatic zeal under a brow furrowed like cracked leather. The fight was a brutal ballet, Thorn's hybrid strength propelling him forward in lunges that splintered wooden beams, the lieutenant countering with swipes that raked furrows in the walls, sending plaster dust cascading like fine snow. The storm outside battered the leaded windows, rain lashing the glass in frantic sheets that distorted the lightning's glare into fractured mirrors. In the heart of the tumult, Ilara found herself cornered in a narrow antechamber, its walls lined with dusty portraits of Thorn's forebears, their painted eyes seeming to watch with silent judgment. The rival beta lunged, his blade, a jagged dagger forged in silver, grazing her side in a searing line that parted flesh and cloth alike. Pain bloomed hot and textured, a fiery bloom spreading through her ribs, blood welling warm and sticky to soak her gown in darkening stains. She staggered, vision blurring at the edges, the metallic taste of her own blood on her tongue mingling with the room's musty scent of aged velvet and forgotten incense. Thorn's roar shattered the din, a primal sound that shook the rafters like an earthquake's prelude. He dispatched the foe with a savage twist, bones cracking audibly in the confined space, then cradled Ilara against him as she slumped, his hands pressing against the wound in a desperate bid to staunch the flow. "Not you," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation, the words fracturing like the storm-torn sky outside. The echo of his mate's end replayed in his mind, her blood pooling on forest moss under a harvest moon, fueling a terror that clawed deeper than any claw. In that crucible of peril, within the chapel's adjoining shelter where torches sputtered in iron brackets, casting wavering shadows that danced like tormented souls, the ritual deepened unbidden. Thorn invoked the ancient words of binding, his voice a resonant chant that wove through the thunder's rumble, sharing his essence through a deliberate bite at her shoulder. Not fatal, but a profound communion. His fangs pierced skin with a sharp, intimate pressure, the sensation blooming into liquid fire that raced through her veins, healing the gash with a tingling warmth that knit muscle and flesh anew. The air shimmered with ethereal energy, snowflakes swirling through a cracked window like celebratory confetti caught in the gale, their chill contrasting the feverish heat of transformation. Ilara gasped, her body arching as immortal fire purged the lingering illness, reshaping suffering into unyielding strength, her eyes fluttering open to glow with the shared light of their bond. Wolfish gold flecked with Dhampir silver. As the battle waned with the rivals' retreat, their howls fading into the storm's howl, Ilara rose renewed beside him, the antechamber's air now heavy with the scent of ozone and victory's sweat. But the choice loomed larger than ever, an ethical leviathan in the quiet aftermath, Full eternity meant forsaking the purity of mortality's ephemeral joys, embracing instead the curse of outliving all she had ever cherished: friends, memories, the simple rhythm of human days. Thorn held her close, his breath warm against her temple, the thunder fading to a distant murmur, as if the world itself held its breath. Death's presence retreated to the edges of perception, patient and watchful, but undefeated. Would granting mercy to the fallen rivals, offering them a path to redemption within the pack, truly heal their bond, or merely invite the shadow's insidious return, testing the fragile light they had kindled? Sunrise unfurled over the estate in a tapestry of crimson and burnished gold, the storm's furious aftermath yielding to a tentative serenity that bathed the grounds in a glow both forgiving and revealing. Uprooted trees lay scattered like the fallen warriors of some mythic saga, their trunks splintered and bark peeled back in ragged wounds, while the earth steamed gently with the absorbed fury of rain, releasing vapors that curled upward like the sighs of the weary land. Patches of snow lingered in shaded hollows, melting into translucent pools that mirrored the sky's hesitant blue, and the air carried a crisp cleanness undercut by the faint, lingering perfume of wet stone and blooming heather. Resilient flora, pushing through the mud as if defying the night's chaos. Ilara stood at Elias's grave in the ancient cemetery, the small stone marker now softened by lichen and moss, its etched name a silent testament amid the yew tree's solemn vigil. The locket, cool against her throat, now shared space with the ring on her finger, their symbols intertwined, a silver paw cradling the etched wolf and thorned rose, like threads of fate woven from loss and promise. The transformation coursed through her like a river unbound, granting a vigor that banished the insidious creep of illness from her veins, her steps sure and her breaths deep. Yet it awakened a profound ache, deeper than any physical scar. Visions of futures stretching into infinity assailed her in quiet moments. Memories of Elias's tiny hands and laughter sharpened to blades that cut with exquisite precision. Disillusionment had yielded to a hard-won purpose, resistance melting into reluctant acceptance. Love's inevitability emerging as a redemptive force, a beacon illuminating the shadowed corridors of her soul. Thorn approached from the winding path, his presence announced by the subtle shift in the air, the earthy musk of his skin mingling with the faint leather of his boots, still caked in mud from the night's defense. The pack's cheers echoed distantly from the great hall, a raucous symphony of toasts and howls celebrating the surrender of Draven's remnants. But Thorn moved with a quiet gravity, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stripped away the world's clamor. Mercy had prevailed through his ethical decree, integration over annihilation, offering the rival survivors a chance at atonement within the pack's fold, workshops of labor and lore to rebuild what war had torn. His solitude, that ancient companion, lifted only in the refuge of her gaze. His guilt over past failures alchemized into a tentative hope, fragile as dawn's first light. He desired this life with her above all, a shared eternity not as isolation's prison, but as a vast expanse where they could wander hand in hand, redeeming one another through the quiet acts of enduring love. They knelt together before the grave, hands clasping over the cool stone, fingers interlacing with a natural intimacy that spoke of battles shared and secrets unveiled. The wind softened to a gentle caress, rustling the leaves overhead in a susurrus like whispered approvals from the departed, carrying the delicate scent of wild roses blooming nearby, their petals unfurling in defiant clusters, reds as deep as fresh spilled blood fading to the old golds of time-worn treasure. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, Thorn murmured, his voice a philosophical anchor in the morning's hush, resonant and compassionate, drawing from the well of centuries where wisdom and sorrow mingled like ink in water. Ilara nodded, her free hand tracing the etched letters of Elias's name with deliberate tenderness, the stone's rough texture grounding her amid the swirl of newfound eternity. "And I choose to live, for him, for the light he left in me, for us," she replied, her words laced with the poetic intimacy of one who had danced on death's edge and returned transformed. A ritual of closure unfolded then, intimate and unhurried. From a small pouch at her waist, she scattered Elias's favorite wildflowers, daisies and forget-me-nots gathered from the highlands' remnants, their colors vivid against the lingering snow, petals drifting like confetti from a forgotten celebration. The act released a burst of fragrance, sweet and fleeting, mingling with the earth's damp richness, as if the grave itself exhaled in gratitude. Thorn's arm encircled her waist, solid and reassuring, the weave of his shirt rough against her side, his heartbeat syncing with hers in the harmonious rhythm of their Dampier bond, a steady thrum that echoed the distant pulse of the estate, awakening to life. As they rose, the sun climbing higher to warm the air and chase away the last shadows, the estate stirred around them, servants lighting candles in mullioned windows, their flames twinkling like welcoming eyes in the broadening day. Werewolves emerging from the hall with purposeful strides, their forms shifting fluidly between man and beast under the approving sky. No death claimed them this day, its invisible specter banished to the periphery by the light they had kindled together. Instead, transformation bloomed in full, suffering transmuted into unyielding strength, the encroaching shadows yielding to a radiant dawn. Their love, forged in the crucible of graveside tears and bloodied battles, promised a redemption profound and enduring. The Alpha King and his Dampier Queen, oscillating gracefully between the mortal warmth of sunlit hours and the immortal depth of starlit eternities, their choices now a shared tapestry rather than solitary burdens. Yet in the profound quiet that followed, as the sun's rays gilded the yew branches and the wind carried the first birdsong, Alara felt the eternal whisper stir once more, a subtle undercurrent reminding her that choices would remain unending, woven into the fabric of their bond like thorns amid the roses. But faced together, they held the power to illuminate even the darkest nights. The grave stood as silent witness, the moon's silver tear long dried and replaced by dawn's warm embrace, a testament to the beauty born from suffering's forge. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.